February 15, 1944, WWII, New Guinea. In the suffocating pre-dawn darkness, the heavy, humid air buzzes with the relentless drone of mosquitoes. Inside a canvas tent, Second Lieutenant William J. Smith violently swats at the netting of his cot. Sleep is an impossibility. The nervous anticipation of the morning's combat mission grips his chest like a vice. In the mess tent, the scene is quiet, tense, and utterly primitive. Army Air Corps' aviators slice into undercooked pancakes, the raw batter bleeding into the syrup. They pour sugar into their tin cups of coffee, methodically skimming off the floating black ants with the practiced precision of hardened veterans. This is the edge of the world, a forward operating base where the 5th Army Air Force prepares to hurl its might across the Bismarck Sea. Outside, the stillness of the jungle is shattered by a deafening mechanical roar. The Wright R-2600 radial engines of the B-25 Mitchell bombers cough, sputter, and finally catch, spitting blue flames into the black sky. The 38th Bomb Group is awake, and they are heading straight into the abyss. By early 1944, the Southwest Pacific Theater is a sprawling, unforgiving chessboard of jungle islands and vast ocean expanses. The Allied counteroffensive, spearheaded by General Douglas MacArthur, is methodically clawing its way up the New Guinea coast and through the Solomon Islands. The ultimate prize in this sector is not a single piece of land, but the neutralization of a massive stronghold, Rabaul. Located on the northern tip of New Britain, Rabaul is the crown jewel of the Japanese Imperial Defense Perimeter. It boasts a garrison of over 80,000 battle-hardened troops, deep water anchorages filled with warships, and interlocking airfields projecting lethal power across the Bismarck archipelago. But MacArthur and his brilliant air commander, Lieutenant General George C. Kenney of the 5th Army Air Force, recognized that a direct amphibious assault on Rabaul would be a bloodbath. Instead, they devise a strategy of strangulation. To make Rabaul wither on the vine and reduce it to a de facto prisoner of war camp, the Allies must sever its arteries. The most vital of these supply lines flows through Aviation. Situated on the northernmost tip of neighboring New Ireland, Aviation Township is a bustling, heavily fortified logistical hub. It is the back door to Rabaul. It features an excellent natural harbor, a sprawling airfield, and a dedicated aircraft assembly facility. Replacement fighters and bombers arrive here in crates, are rapidly assembled, and flown south to replenish the endless attrition of the Pacific Air War. Ammunition, replacement parts, and fresh combat personnel funnel through Aviation via freighters, troop barges, and even cargo submarines. If the Japanese Empire is to maintain any offensive capability or hold its defensive line in the Southwest Pacific, Aviation must remain operational. Kenney knows this. He also knows that high-altitude bombing alone will not permanently break the back of the Japanese garrison. In the days leading up to mid-February, consolidated B-24 liberators have hammered Aviation from the stratosphere. They have churned the main airstrip into a useless, pockmarked landscape of muddy craters and smashed a portion of the local air power. But high-altitude raids lack the surgical precision required to wipe out dispersed supply dumps, hidden anti-aircraft batteries, and deeply entrenched port facilities. Total neutralization demands the terrifying signature tactic of the 5th Air Force, the low-level deck-strafing attack. The Japanese defenders at Aviation anticipate this exact move. They have spent weeks transforming the harbor and township into a flak trap. Newly installed radar systems scan the horizon, feeding early warnings to layered batteries of anti-aircraft guns. Dual-barrel 25mm cannons, heavy machine guns, and 5-inch artillery pieces are dug into reinforced earthen revetments. The gunners are confident. They know that the confined approaches to the harbor will force American bombers into narrow, predictable flight paths. They intend to throw a murderous volume of lead and shrapnel into the sky, creating an impenetrable wall of fire that will exact a devastating toll on any low-flying aircraft. To breach this wall, the 5th Air Force relies on a uniquely modified weapon, the North American B-25D Mitchell medium bomber. Standard B-25s are formidable, but the aircraft deployed in the Southwest Pacific have been transformed into flying executioners at the modification depots in Brisbane, Australia. The traditional glass bombardier nose is stripped away. In its place, engineers pack 4 forward-firing 50 caliber machine guns. Paired with dual blister pack 50 calibers bolted to the sides of the cockpit and a top twin turret locked in the forward position, the heavily armed Mitchells can unleash a blistering, concentrated hurricane of armor-piercing fire. On the morning of February 15th, the staging base at WWII swarms with coordinated mechanical urgency. Ground crews top off fuel tanks and winch heavy 500-pound high-explosive bombs into the bays. These bombs are fitted with specific 8 to 12-second delay fuses, ensuring the low-flying bombers are not blown out of the sky by their own blast waves. Among the aircraft preparing for the assault is a B-25D nicknamed Pissonnet, tail number J33F. At the controls sit First Lieutenant Eugene Benson and his junior pilot, Second Lieutenant William J. Smith. They are part of the 71st Bomb Squadron, known as the Wolf Pack, operating within the heavily decorated 38th Bomb Group. The mission profile, designated 46D1, requires a grueling, fuel-stretching marathon across the open ocean to reach the northern tip of New Ireland. It is a flight path leaving absolutely no margin for navigational error, mechanical failure, or hesitation. 300 miles away from the roaring Mitchells at WWII, a very different kind of aircraft prepares to lift off from the sheltered waters of Langmack Bay at Finschhafen. This is the domain of the United States Navy's Patrol Squadron 34, operating under Fleet Air Wing 17, known as the Black Cats. These squadrons fly the consolidated PBY-5 Catalina flying boat. Painted flat black to blend into the night sky during nocturnal raids, the Catalina is a massive lumbering beast of an aircraft. Standing 21 feet high with a wingspan of over 104 feet, it is unglamorous and painfully slow, boasting a cruising speed of just 125 miles per hour. But what it lacks in speed and armor, it makes up for in rugged endurance, capable of flying for more than 2,500 miles without refueling. On this morning, Navy Lieutenant Nathan Green Gordon, a 24-year-old pilot from Arkansas, is not flying a bombing run. He and his 8-man crew aboard the Catalina, nicknamed Arkansas Traveler, are assigned a critical high-risk support role. Gordon's orders are to fly north, orbit the open ocean off the coast of New Ireland, and provide dedicated search and rescue cover for the 5th Air Force's massive strike on Aviation. The brass knows the defenses at the township are lethal. It is a mathematical certainty that American bombers will be shot down, and when they are, the Arkansas Traveler is their only lifeline. Gordon orders the moorings cast off, and the heavy flying boat plows through the bay, eventually breaking the surface tension and climbing slowly into the morning light. Accompanied by a protective escort of 4 Republic P-47 Thunderbolt fighters, the Catalina makes the long transit to its predetermined holding sector well off the northern tip of New Ireland. As Gordon idles his aircraft at 2,000 feet, he looks down through the cockpit canopy at the Bismarck Sea. The weather is clear, with unlimited visibility, but the ocean below is violent. A heavy weather system has whipped the surface into deep churning troughs and towering crests, with swells rolling between 12 and 16 feet high. Gordon knows his Catalina is incredibly tough, but he sincerely hopes he will not be forced to land in those monstrous waves. While the Arkansas Traveler holds its lonely station, the devastating power of the 5th Air Force is assembling in the skies to the south. Over Sand Island, the designated rendezvous point, the scattered elements of the strike force converge into a single terrifying armada. The 8 Mitchells of the 71st Wolf Pack seamlessly merge with the B-25s of the 405th Green Dragons and the 823rd Terrible Tigers. They are soon joined by the 4 squadrons of the legendary 345th Bomb Group, the Era Pashas, and Sleek Douglas, a 20 Havoc light bombers from the 3rd Bomb Group. High above this heavy metal formation, a protective umbrella of twin-engine Lockheed P-38 Lightning fighters weaves through the clouds. Mission 46D1 is now fully formed and pushing northeast toward the target. Inside the cockpit of the Pissonet, Lieutenant Smith reviews the strict parameters of the assault. The formations will approach Aviation from the south, flying directly up the new island chain for a northwesterly run at the base. The attack must be a continuous, overwhelming wave of destruction. The planes will cross the target area 30 seconds apart, flying wingtip to wingtip in groups of 4. As the coastline of New Ireland begins to materialize on the horizon, the bomber groups initiate a steep, aggressive descent. The altimeters unwind rapidly until the B-25s level out at a perilous 100 feet above the ocean. Hurtling forward at 270 miles per hour, the Mitchells skim just above the crests of the waves, their propellers churning the sea spray. The harbor of Aviation, packed with enemy shipping, supply dumps, and waiting anti-aircraft batteries, rushes toward their windshields, setting the stage for a brutal collision of steel and fire. To fully grasp the sheer lethality of Mission 46D1, one must look at the mechanical evolution of the American assault. By early 1944, the 5th Air Force has perfected the devastating art of the low-altitude strike. High-altitude precision bombing is often thwarted by heavy cloud cover and the evasive maneuvering of enemy shipping. The solution is brutal face-to-face combat. By stripping the glass bombardier noses from the B-25 Mitchells and packing them with forward-firing 50-caliber machine guns, the bombers are transformed into massive flying shotguns. As the Wolf Pack drops to 100 feet, they attack wingtip to wingtip. 4 bombers abreast means 32 forward-firing heavy machine guns are simultaneously shredding a path through the target zone. There's no need for pinpoint aiming. The sheer volume of lead saturates the harbor. This suppression fire is designed to pin down the Japanese anti-aircraft gunners, just long enough for the Mitchells to release their payload. The 500-pound high-explosive bombs, equipped with 8-12-second delay fuses, tumble directly into the wharves and supply dumps. The delay allows the aircraft to clear the blast radius before the earth erupts beneath them. It is a tactic of overwhelming, synchronized violence, built to break the enemy before they can accurately return fire. But the Japanese defenders at Aviation are neither blind nor defenseless. From the perspective of the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy gun crews, the American tactic is a known quantity. They know the B-25s must come in low and fast, restricting the bombers to predictable flight paths over the harbor. Early warning radar has already alerted the gunners, stripping away the element of total surprise. As the roar of the Wright Cyclone engines shakes the coconut palms, the shoreline erupts. The Japanese defense is layered and deeply entrenched. Dual-barrel 25mm anti-aircraft guns, secured in newly completed earthen revetments, track the incoming Mitchells. Heavy machine guns and even 5-inch coastal artillery pieces depress their barrels to fire at point-blank range over the water. For the Japanese gunners, it is a desperate, deafening fight for survival. They fire into a solid wall of American lead, trying to knock the heavy bombers out of the sky before the delayed action bombs wipe their positions off the map. The airspace above Aviation Harbor instantly transforms into a chaotic, crisscrossing web of tracer fire, incendiary shells, and black bursts of flak. It is a zero-sum engagement. Inside this maelstrom of metal and fire, the human reality of combat is reduced to fractions of a second. In the cockpit of the B-25 Pissonet, Lieutenants Eugene Benson and William Smith are focused entirely on holding their formation. They release their payload perfectly, watching thick black smoke immediately rise from the warehouses on the main wharf. But as they clear the drop zone, the mathematical probability of the Japanese defenses catches up to them. A sharp, violent clap rocks the aircraft. The left engine instantly bursts into flames. Navigator Holly Rushing reacts with training-ingrained speed, pulling the Lux fire extinguisher and chemically suffocating the engine fire. But a second, far heavier explosion tears through the fuselage just behind the cockpit. Flak has penetrated the airframe and ignited the 200-gallon auxiliary Tokyo tank. A 6-foot plume of fire rips through the interior of the bomber like a blowtorch. The hydraulic lines sever, dropping the landing gear and instantly bleeding the aircraft's airspeed. The left wheel catches fire, reigniting the left engine. The aircraft is mortally wounded, and a terrifying silent struggle ensues in the cockpit. Benson, the senior pilot, instinctively pulls back on the yoke, desperate to gain altitude and put distance between his crew and the inevitable horrors of a Japanese prisoner of war camp. But Smith knows the intense heat will burn through the wing spar in seconds. Gaining altitude means a death spiral. He fights Benson for the dual controls, aggressively forcing the nose down toward the treacherous pitching swells of the Bismarck Sea. The physical reality of ditching a medium bomber in the open ocean is an act of calculated violence. With the hydraulics dead, the flaps unresponsive, and the left wing threatening to snap from the intense heat of the blowtorch fire, Lieutenant Smith makes a desperate final maneuver. He cuts the power to the surviving right engine and wrestles the nose up. By sheer providence, the dying B-25 slides directly into the deep trough of a 16-foot swell, rather than slamming headlong into a wall of pitching water. The deceleration force is staggering, violently throwing the crew against their harnesses. The Mitchell comes to a grinding halt, upright but rapidly flooding. Burning aviation fuel immediately spreads across the water's surface, encircling the sinking wreckage. Survival now hinges on seconds. In the rear of the plane, the situation is catastrophic. Tail gunner Albert Gross, hideously burned from the ignited auxiliary tank, attempts to crawl toward the cockpit, but as the fuselage breaks open, he and radioman Claude Heelan are sucked out into the churning ocean, never to be seen again. In the cockpit, Benson and Navigator Rushing scramble through the top escape hatch. Smith, trapped by the encroaching flames and a heavily bleeding gash on his leg, stands on the sinking nose of the aircraft, trapped by the ring of burning fuel on the water. Suddenly, the trapped air and pressure within the sinking fuselage detonate. The explosion blows the plexiglass nose completely out, launching the 21-year-old pilot over the flames and plunging him into the freezing hypersaline waters of the Bismarck Sea. But the tragedy of the Pissonet is only one fraction of the unfolding nightmare. From the tactical angle of the subsequent bomber waves, the airspace over Kavieng has deteriorated into a chaotic, blinded kill zone. The leading squadrons have been too successful. The sprawling warehouse district known as Chinatown is a raging inferno. As the B-25s of the 345th Air Apaches roar in at treetop height, they are forced to fly blindly through suffocating walls of black smoke. The concussive force of the exploding supply dumps turns the sky into a minefield of upward hurling debris. 55-gallon drums of aviation fuel and jagged sheets of corrugated steel are launched directly into the flight paths of the low-flying Mitchells. It is here that the attackers become victims of their own devastating ordnance. A B-25 nicknamed Jack Rabbit Express is struck in the right engine by either flak or rising debris, violently veering into a fiery cartwheel that kills all aboard. Nearby, Gremlin's Holiday takes a direct hit from a Japanese incendiary shell. The explosion blows the top turret dome clean off, ripping the headset and goggles from the gunner and opening the belly of the bomber to the wind. The crippled aircraft stalls, plunges nose first into the ocean, and violently porpoises back to the surface, leaving its battered crew to escape the sinking tomb underwater. High above this slaughter, the perspective shifts to the Guardian. Orbiting at 2,000 feet, Navy Lieutenant Nathan Gordon monitors the frantic overlapping radio traffic echoing through the headset of the Arkansas Traveler. The airwaves are choked with coordinates of ditched aircraft and panicked reports of crews in the water. Looking toward Aviation, Gordon can clearly see the towering pillars of smoke staining the tropical sky. More importantly, as he drops the heavy Catalina to a lower altitude, he spots the unmistakable brilliant yellow-orange bloom of sea marker dye staining the dark crests of the waves. Gordon quickly assesses the tactical reality. The downed airmen are adrift in shark-infested waters, surrounded by burning debris, and drifting dangerously close to the Japanese-held shoreline. Leaving them means certain death or capture. But Gordon also knows the mechanical limitations of his own aircraft. The WWII Catalina is a durable flying boat, but it is not designed to land in turbulent 16-foot oceanic swells, let alone within range of hostile coastal artillery. Landing in these conditions risks snapping the aircraft's hull in half. Yet, as Gordon looks down at the tiny bobbing specks of the American aircrews, he reaches up and pulls back the throttles, committing his slow, unarmored aircraft to a terrifying descent. The time is exactly 11 a.m. when the Arkansas's Traveler begins its final approach into the churning waters off Aviation. Lieutenant Nathan Gordon's call sign, Gardenia 6, has been flooded with distress coordinates, but his immediate focus is the vivid patch of yellow-orange sea dye, staining the 15-foot swells below. Landing a consolidated WWII Catalina in a calm harbor requires precision. Landing one in the open ocean during a violent squall is an exercise in controlled crashing. To survive the impact, Gordon must execute a textbook stall landing. He must keep the bow of the heavy flying boat pitched high, forcing the stepped hull of the stern to strike the surface first, using the immense drag of the ocean to instantly brake the aircraft. Crucially, he must time the touchdown to hit the downslope of a massive wave. If he miscalculates and strikes the face of an incoming swell, the water will crush the nose, flipping the Catalina and instantly drowning the crew. Gordon cuts the airspeed, fights the crosswinds, and drops the massive aircraft into the trough. The impact is brutal. The 16-year-old airframe shudders violently under the stress, and the sharp crack of popping rivets echoes through the hull. Seawater immediately begins weeping through the sprung seams into the bilge, but the plane is down and it is intact. Gordon throttles up, aggressively taxiing the lumbering beast through the debris field toward the center of the dye marker. The crew crowds the blister windows, straining to see through the sea spray. They spot an object riding a crest, but as the Catalina draws near, the adrenaline drains from the cabin. It is a partially deflated, empty life raft. There are no survivors. It is a crushing psychological blow, but Gordon has no time to mourn. He shoves the throttles forward, forces the battered flying boat back into the air, and resumes the hunt. High above, Captain Tony Chiappi, the operations officer of the 498th Squadron, is circling the slaughter in his B-25 Old Baldy. He has located the 6 surviving crew members of Gremlin's Holiday, including the severely wounded tail gunner David McCready and the unauthorized passenger, Captain Robert Huff. Radio frequencies are jammed, so Chiappi relies on visual communication. He coordinates with the P-47 Thunderbolt escorts to guide the Catalina, plunging his Mitchell toward the water to drop twin smoke flares directly over the huddled survivors. Gordon spots the smoke and immediately lines up for a second landing. He brings the Arkansas's Traveler down hard, the hull screaming against the friction of the waves, and taxis toward the 2 small rafts tied together in the swell. Standard naval rescue doctrine dictates that the aircraft must remain stationary, allowing the lighter life rafts to pull themselves to the fuselage. But the Bismarck Sea is not a textbook environment. The wind and the heavy currents are throwing the rafts wildly off course. Gordon maneuvers the Catalina closer, and his crew hurls a heaving line. The downed airmen catch it, but a lethal complication instantly arises. The aircraft is still surging forward, and its massive twin propellers are churning the air just feet above the water. If the crew hauls the line taut, the forward momentum of the plane will either drag the exhausted men underwater and drown them. Or worse, the violent pitching of the sea will lift the rafts directly into the spinning blades. Surrounded by the splashes of Japanese coastal artillery dialing in their range, Gordon makes a terrifying tactical decision. He reaches up and cuts the ignition. The roar of the Pratt & Whitney engines dies. The propellers sputter, chop, and finally freeze. In the middle of an active combat zone, sitting perfectly still in the crosshairs of enemy gunners, the Arkansas's Traveler goes completely silent. In the rear of the aircraft, the physical demands of the rescue are excruciating. The survivors of Gremlin's Holiday are helpless dead weight, their uniforms saturated with seawater and coated in slick, toxic aviation fuel. Inside the port blister window, Paul Germeau, the strongest man on the Navy crew, reaches out into the pitching ocean. As the waves violently slam the rafts against the aluminum hull of the Catalina, Germeau grabs the slick, bleeding men one by one. Huff and McCready are screaming in agony from broken bones and severe burns, but there is no time for medical delicacy. They are manhandled, dragged, and thrown through the blister window onto the metal deck. As the last man falls into the fuselage, the Japanese artillery finds its range. Geysers of water erupt just yards from the Catalina's wings. Shrapnel hisses through the air. Gordon knows they have overstayed their window of survival. He slams his hand onto the starter buttons, praying the engines have not flooded in the turbulent chop. The port engine coughs, catches, and belches a thick cloud of black smoke. The starboard engine roars to life a second later. Without waiting for the engines to fully warm, Gordon shoves the throttles to the firewall. The overloaded Catalina slaps violently against the incoming waves, fighting the immense drag of the water. With Japanese tracers cutting across its nose, the tough old bird groans, breaks the suction of the sea, and claws its way back into the smoke-filled sky. But Gordon's mission is far from over, because 2 miles away, drifting helplessly in the shark-infested currents, the crew of the Pissonnet has just heard the unmistakable sound of approaching aircraft. For Lieutenants Smith, Benson, and Rushing, the situation has devolved into a hopeless waiting game. The yellow-orange sea dye marking their position has long since dissipated in the heavy chop. The towering 16-foot swells act as a visual prison. When the men are lifted to the crest, they can see the burning ruins of Aviation, but when they slide down into the deep troughs, their world is reduced to walls of dark water. Shadows darting beneath their boots amplify the ever-present psychological terror of sharks. But as the roar of aircraft engines cuts through the wind, Smith squints against the blinding glare of the midday tropical sun. They are not Japanese Zeros. They are massive, heavily armed Republic P-47 Thunderbolts. With desperate urgency, the 3 downed airmen unclip the chrome signal mirrors from their Westlife vests and flash the sunlight toward the fighters. The Thunderbolts instantly bank, dropping into a tight, protective orbit over their position. The fighter pilots radio the coordinates to Nathan Gordon, guiding the Arkansas's Traveler toward its 3rd rescue of the morning. But Gordon is now operating on borrowed time and compromised machinery. The Catalina has taken a severe beating from the first 2 oceanic landings. Inside the fuselage, the situation is desperate. The Navy crew has resorted to snapping wooden pencils in half and jamming them into the sprung rivet holes to slow the freezing seawater rushing into the bilge. Furthermore, Smith's raftless crew has drifted dangerously close to the Aviation shoreline. To reach them, Gordon must fly directly through a concentrated hail of Japanese anti-aircraft tracers. Unfazed, Gordon drops the buoyant bow of the Catalina down the face of a massive swell, settling the bruised flying boat onto a surface whipped into a violent froth by both the wind and exploding artillery shells. Once again, Gordon kills the engines. Once again, the crew risks their lives hanging out of the blister windows to throw a heaving line. The ocean slams Smith, Benson, and Rushing against the aluminum hull, but they are rapidly hauled inside, collapsing onto the metal deck alongside the moaning survivors of Gremlin's Holiday. Gordon hits the starters, the engines catch, and the heavy Catalina lurches forward, leaving geysers of Japanese gunfire in its wake. As the aircraft reaches cruising altitude, the P-47 escorts are forced to break away. Their fuel gauges are tapping empty, and they must return to base. Gordon turns the Arkansas Traveler south, putting 10 miles between his overloaded aircraft and the burning harbor. Inside the fuselage, Smith leans back against a bulkhead, allowing the crushing adrenaline to subside as the sweet reality of survival washes over him. Then, the Catalina banks into a wide, sweeping turn, heading straight back toward the inferno. Over the radio, Major Chester Coltharp, circling above in his B-25 Princess Pat, has transmitted a chilling update. Another Mitchell bomber flown by Captain William Cavoli has ditched. This crew is not miles out at sea. They are trapped just 600 yards off the Japanese-held beach. Gordon runs the mental calculus. His aircraft is battered, leaking, and grossly over its maximum weight capacity. He has no fighter escort. To go back is to invite almost certain destruction. But the 24-year-old Navy pilot refuses to leave American airmen to the mercy of the Imperial Japanese Army. With the Princess Pat providing the only remaining overhead cover, Gordon drops the Catalina directly into Kavieng Harbor. He executes his finest, most aggressive landing of the day, bringing the flying boat to a violent halt just yards from Cavali's life rafts. The audacity of the maneuver temporarily stuns the Japanese coastal defenders, but the hesitation lasts only seconds. The shoreline completely erupts. Muzzle flashes ripple across the beach, and the water surrounding the Catalina boils with incoming shrapnel and heavy artillery shells. Fear overrides exhaustion. In record time, Cavoli and his 5 crew members are dragged through the blister windows. Gordon immediately punches the starter buttons. The starboard engine fires to life. The port engine does not. It is the ultimate nightmare scenario. The Catalina is pinned to the surface of the ocean, spinning in a slow circle under the thrust of a single engine, serving as a stationary target for dozens of Japanese heavy guns. Gordon realizes the port engine is flooded. If they continuously grind the starter, the engine will flood worse or the battery will die, condemning all 23 men aboard to death. Under the heaviest fire of the day, Gordon forces his co-pilot to take his hands off the ignition. They must wait. For 2 agonizing, eternity-stretching minutes, the men sit in the belly of the aircraft, listening to the deafening roar of water geysers erupting outside the thin aluminum hull. Finally, Gordon gives the order. The starter engages. The propeller blades groan, turn slowly, and suddenly blur into a deafening roar. With its throttles pushed past the red line, the Arkansas Traveler beats the ocean into submission. Groaning under the impossible weight of 15 rescued Army aviators and its own 8-man crew, the black flying boat tears itself free from the Bismarck Sea, leaving the devastation of Kavieng behind. The return flight to Finschhafen is not a victory lap. It is a flying trauma ward. Inside the cramped, uninsulated fuselage of the Arkansas Traveler, the crushing reality of the morning's violence finally settles over the 23 men. The massive surge of adrenaline that fueled their survival rapidly evaporates, leaving behind profound shock, severe pain, and deep psychological exhaustion. Combat-hardened aviators who had stared down point-blank coastal artillery just an hour earlier now find their hands trembling so violently they cannot strike a match to light a cigarette. The floor plates of the Catalina are slick with a mixture of freezing seawater, aviation oil, and the blood of the wounded. In the cockpit, Lieutenant Nathan Gordon keeps his eyes locked on the southern horizon, meticulously nursing the overstressed Pratt & Whitney engines every agonizing mile back to the safety of the Allied lines. Behind them, the Japanese stronghold of Kavieng is being erased from the map. Mission 46D1 has achieved its brutal objective with terrifying efficiency. When Allied high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft sweep over the northern tip of New Ireland in the following days, the photographic evidence confirms a landscape of absolute devastation. The once bustling logistics hub has ceased to function. The sprawling warehouse district of Chinatown, the heavily fortified wharves, and the vital aircraft assembly facilities have been pounded into unrecognizable fields of ash, cratered earth, and splintered timber. The massive fuel and ammunition dumps continue to burn for nearly a week, sending thick, towering columns of black smoke into the stratosphere, a grim beacon visible to Allied pilots from over 70 miles away. The harbor itself is a graveyard, choked with the submerged burning steel of Japanese freighters, barges, and floatplanes. The strategic consequences of this single concentrated morning of violence are monumental. By annihilating Aviation, the 5th Army Air Force has successfully severed the final major logistical artery feeding the Japanese fortress at Rabaul. The 80,000 Imperial troops garrisoned on New Britain are now completely isolated. Cut off from fighter replacements, heavy ammunition, and seaborne resupply, the once mighty Rabaul military complex is effectively reduced to a massive self-sustaining prisoner of war camp. General Douglas MacArthur's strategy of strangulation is entirely validated. Rabaul will not be subjected to a costly amphibious invasion. It will be bypassed and left to wither on the vine, saving tens of thousands of American lives. With the threat of Aviation permanently neutralized, the Allied High Command immediately shifts its operational focus westward, green-lighting the impending invasion of the Admiralty Islands and accelerating the relentless push toward the Philippines. But this strategic masterstroke is purchased at a steep, unforgiving price in American blood and machinery. The flak trap over Aviation exacted its intended toll on the low-flying attackers. The airspace over the harbor proved to be one of the most lethal environments in the Southwest Pacific Theater. The 5th Air Force loses 2 B-25 Mitchells from the 38th Bomb Group, 3 from the legendary 345th Air Apaches, and 3 sleek Douglas A-20 Havocs from the 3rd Bomb Group's Grim Reapers. For the aircrews who were blown out of the sky, swallowed by the Bismarck Sea, or captured by the notoriously brutal Japanese defenders, the strategic victory is a ghost. When the Arkansas's Traveler finally touches down in the sheltered waters of Lame Mac Bay, Navy medical corpsmen swarm the battered, leaking flying boat. The critically wounded are gently unloaded and rushed to the base hospital, their war temporarily over. For 2nd Lieutenant William J. Smith, his face singed bare of eyebrows and his leg deeply lacerated by the crash, the immediate sensation as his boots touched solid ground is a surreal, dizzying mixture of grief for his lost crewmen and an overwhelming, breathless gratitude to the Navy pilot who refused to leave them behind. Inside the Navy hospital at Finschhafen, the sterile scent of iodine and clean bandages replaces the suffocating stench of burning aviation fuel and cordite. Medical corpsmen work methodically through the night, cleaning severe shrapnel lacerations, setting shattered bones, and treating the agonizing flash burns suffered by the rescued bomber crews. For the survivors, the abrupt transition from the chaotic violence of the Bismarck Sea to the quiet safety of an Allied ward is deeply jarring. The next morning, a Navy Seabee escorts a bandaged Lieutenant Smith to the base cafeteria, introducing the battered pilot to the surreal luxury of fresh food and cold ice cream, a stark, almost incomprehensible contrast to the slaughter he had barely survived 24 hours earlier. Before noon, a fat cat, a B-25 Mitchell, stripped of its armor and weaponry for use as a transport, arrives to ferry the survivors of the Wolf Pack back to their permanent staging ground at the 17-mile airbase near Port Moresby. As Smith boards the transport, he carries a profound, lingering regret. He had desperately wanted to find the pilot of the Black Catalina, to thank him personally, only to be told that the Navy lieutenant was already back in the air, flying another patrol mission over the Pacific. The staggering bravery of that Catalina crew, however, does not go unnoticed by the Allied High Command. The official after-action reports detailing the rescue of 15 downed airmen from the heavily defended waters of Aviation Harbor quickly circulate up the chain of command, reaching the desk of Admiral William F. Bull Halsey. Reading the account of the 4 open ocean landings executed under direct coastal artillery fire, Halsey transmits a message to Fleet Air Wing 17. Please express my admiration to that saga-writing cat crew. This rescue was truly one of the most remarkable feats of the war. For his absolute refusal to abandon American airmen to the enemy, and for demonstrating supreme airmanship under withering fire, 24-year-old Nathan Green Gordon is awarded the United States military's highest decoration, the Medal of Honor. He becomes the only PBY Catalina pilot to receive the award during the entirety of World War II, and the first Navy aviator in the Southwest Pacific Theater to be so decorated. But for the men who survived Mission 46D1, the war is far from over. The Pacific Theater remains a ruthless meat grinder, and the joy of a miraculous rescue is often brutally short-lived. Aboard the Arkansas's Traveler, Smith had experienced a moment of elation when he recognized Second Lieutenant Elmer Jeb Kirkland, a close friend from flight school back in South Carolina, among the rescued crew of Gremlin's Holiday. The two had embraced, amazed to find each other in the same theater of war. Yet, just 6 weeks after surviving the waters of Kavieng, Kirkland is shot down and killed in action. Smith himself refuses to be grounded by his injuries or the trauma of the Kavieng raid. He returns to the cockpit, flying an astounding 46 additional combat missions over the unforgiving jungles of New Guinea, the Dutch East Indies, Biak, Morotai, and the Philippines. He survives multiple close calls, including a terrifying incident where a piece of jagged anti-aircraft shrapnel punches directly through his bomber's windshield, missing his head by inches, and another mission where a live 100-pound parafrag bomb becomes lethally hung up in his bomb bay during landing. Promoted to captain before his 23rd birthday, Smith becomes the operations officer for the 71st Bomb Squadron. General George C. Kenney personally pins the Purple Heart, the Distinguished Flying Cross, and the Air Medal to his uniform. While the smoking ruins of Kavieng fade into the strategic rearview mirror of the advancing Allied forces, the legacy of that February morning permanently alters the psychological landscape of the men who lived it. The 5th Air Force proved that its low-altitude deck-strafing tactics could obliterate even the most heavily defended Japanese strongholds, paving the way for MacArthur's island-hopping campaign. But the raid also proved the absolute necessity of the dedicated air-sea rescue squadrons. The Black Cats ensured that the men asked to fly into these heavily fortified flak traps knew that if they went down, someone would come for them. The passage of time inevitably cools the fires of war. Today, the tropical waters of the Bismarck Sea reveal little of the mechanized violence that once tore the sky apart. The rusted, coral-encrusted hulls of Japanese freighters resting at the bottom of Kavieng Harbor are the only silent witnesses to the devastating fury of Mission 46D1. In the grand, sweeping calculus of the Second World War, the obliteration of a single logistical hub on the northern tip of New Ireland is but a tactical footnote, a necessary, brutal step in the long, bloody road toward Tokyo. But history is not merely a ledger of destroyed tonnage, captured territory, and strategic maneuvers. It is fundamentally a record of human endurance. The events of February 5-10, 1944, offer a profound distillation of the Pacific War's starkest contrasts. This was a conflict defined by terrifying industrial-scale slaughter, where heavily modified machines like the B-25 Mitchell were engineered strictly for maximum annihilation. Yet, operating within the very heart of that mechanized destruction was an opposing, fiercely human instinct. Lieutenant Nathan Green Gordon and the crew of the Arkansas's Traveler did not drop a single bomb that morning. They did not fire a shot in anger. Instead, they took a slow, unarmored flying boat and repeatedly threw it into a maelstrom of heavy coastal artillery, defying every law of tactical preservation to pull 15 doomed men from the abyss. In doing so, they provided the thousands of young American aviators fighting across the Southwest Pacific with something far more valuable than air superiority. They gave them hope. They proved that even in the most remote, unforgiving corners of a world on fire, the value of a single human life could still outweigh the collective military might of an empire. Decades later, long after the Wright Cyclone engines fell silent. The survivors carried the weight of that day into peacetime. Captain William J. Smith would eventually trade his pilot's wings for the quiet life of a minister, serving his community for over half a century. But he never forgot the burning waters of Aviation, nor the 24-year-old Navy pilot who pulled him from the flames. For the men of the Wolf Pack, the defining lesson of that harrowing morning was not about the perfection of low-altitude bombing, but rather a much simpler, enduring truth. You never give up on rescuing anyone.